Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is the next video in the configuration file series. In the previous two videos of this series, we have seen how we can leverage the Robotics Enterprise template configuration file in a sequence and a flowchart. We have used the configuration template from the RE framework to the sequence and the flowchart which we have created. After that, we have seen how we can pull the configuration file out of the Robotics Enterprise framework and store it in a different shared location to mitigate the risk of deploying the packages every time to the orchestrator. If you haven't watched those videos, I'll put the link in the description and you can refer that. Having said that, let us see the agenda for this video. In this video, we are going to store the configuration file in the orchestrator. Yes, you have heard it right. So we are going to see how we can do that. What is the need to store the configuration file in the orchestrator? If there is a need, how can we store the configuration file in the orchestrator? After that, we are going to see once we store the configuration file in the orchestrator, so we are going to use the concept of storage buckets. So once we upload the configuration file to the storage buckets, then we are going to read the same config in the orchestrator to the studio. After that, we are going to do some of the changes that we might required to do in our project. So for example, if I already have a project which is using the Robotics Enterprise framework, and as we know that RE framework configuration file requires a configuration object, right? So in this video we are going to see how we can accommodate the new config as per the RE framework configuration file. After that, we are going to see the benefits of storing the configuration file in the orchestrator. So let's get started. I am in my UiPath studio. I have a sequence open in front of me. In that sequence, I am using the initallsettings.xaml that I have taken from the Robotics Enterprise template, and we are using the configuration file in a sequence. Now, if you are not sure how to do that, I have a video in which I am explaining how we can use the init all settings and the configuration file from the Robotics Enterprise template to any of the sequence or the flowchart. I'll put the link in the description and you can refer that. So that was the first video. In the next video in the series, we have demonstrated that what happens when the configuration file is a part of the data folder here, and what are the issues that we face, right? So for that, what we did, we stored the configuration file as an path in the orchestrator asset, right? So if we'll go here in the asset, so I have created an asset for the configuration file in the second video, this asset, and this asset is being referred here, and now the configuration is not inside the project folder, but it is inside the orchestrator, and if the path changes, we can just update the path here. Now let us see the agenda for this video. Okay, so we have stored the configuration file in the shared drive, and the shared drive path is configured in the orchestrator. Now what was the benefit here? Now in future, if the path changes or anything, we have to update the config, we can just update the path here, we can just update the config. Right now, what are the challenges we might face with this approach? Now one of the major challenge is that whenever this is saved here, right, there is always a chance, there may be a chance where if let's say I go here and let's say in this path, let us just navigate to this path and Control C, Windows R, Control V, enter, and what happens if I just keep this file open? So your bot is supposed to run at let's say 11 a.m. in the morning, and at 10:30 a.m. I was doing some changes and I forgot to close the configuration file. Now what happens to the process? Since the Excel file is already open or somebody deleted that from the share drive, right? So we usually take care that the share drive is not accessible to everyone, but let's say some of the scenarios somebody deleted this one, right? So do we have an alternative approach of storing the configuration file? So in this video, yes, I'm going to suggest one approach that you can decide whether that can be beneficial for your use or not. So that approach is storing the configuration file not in an Excel but in the storage buckets, right? So UiPath has come up with the concept of storage buckets. So if you will see in the orchestrator, there is something called storage buckets. Now what are storage buckets? You can always navigate to docs.uipath.com and read about the storage buckets. So at a very high level, storage buckets are used to provide a per folder storage for RPA developers to leverage creating automation. For example, any kind of the files can be stored in the storage buckets. In this video, we are going to see how we can leverage the storage buckets to use a configuration file. Okay, so now having said that, the storage buckets are of the following types: Orchestrator, Azure, Amazon S3, and the file systems. So as of now, we are going to use the Orchestrator storage buckets. We have these options available: create, edit, view, and delete. This is a simple CRUD operation which is available in the storage buckets. We are all going to see this. And in the UiPath Studio, if I go to my activities and if I type here storage, so these are the activity, right? So you will see there are activity of download the storage file, list storage file, read storage text, upload, write, and all these operations are available, right? But now you will see the configuration file which we are using is a Excel file, and the storage bucket, we don't have any activity to read the Excel files. We definitely can upload an Excel to the storage bucket, but we don't have an activity which directly gets me the data table out of the storage bucket. So how do I do that? What is an alternative for me, right? So what I can do is, let us go by step. Let us first go ahead and create a storage bucket. Okay, so I don't have all of this, so let me stick to the orchestrator and I will create a storage bucket called config bucket. Okay, so I will call this bucket to store config files. Okay, and add. Now it will create a storage bucket for me. Now my storage bucket is created. I can go ahead and edit and delete the storage buckets from here. In the scope of this video, we want to upload a file to the storage bucket, right? So what all I can upload, I can easily browse for a file and upload it here. But when I go to the activity, I only have an activity called read storage text. If I drag and drop it here, and if I will just analyze the properties, right? So we have the result and it is coming as an string argument, right? So if I, even if I upload a Excel, I would not be able to get the data table. And if I want to leverage the init all settings and the config part of the RE framework, we require a data table, right? So what is an alternative for me? So what I can do is I can just open the config. So as of now, this is the process, and there is a, this process is a straightforward process. We are just opening the acme URL, fetching the credential from the orchestrator and storing the data in the file name. So this is the configuration file for me. So now, since the storage bucket is very much equipped and very much inclined to the text file, so why can't we just copy this data, open a notepad, okay, and let us just convert the config to a text file, right? So I have just directly copy pasted it here. Let me just remove the extra spaces and we will make it such that the UiPath RE framework is able to read this, right? So what I will do is I have removed all the spaces, and now what I am doing is I'm just putting a tab wherever between the values, right? So basically it was all tab, but I just want to make it readable to the code, so that's why I'm doing a tab here. And let me put a tab also here. So this was the file name and this was the name of the Excel. So this is the same structure I have now created in a notepad file: name, value in the description, acme URL, acme credential, a file name, right? So let me go ahead and save this as a text file. So I will store it in my temp folder, okay, so this is my temp folder. Okay, it's inside documents and temp. Okay, so I will call this config dot config for storage buckets maybe. Okay, and I will save it. Now this text file is saved. Let me close this one, right? So now what I want to do, now the first my config is created. Now what I want to do is I want to upload the configuration file to the this storage buckets. How do I do that? It's very simple. I'll go here, browse it, and this is the path. This is the config storage bucket we just created. Let me click open and hit upload. It gives me a warning that if already have a file with this name, it will be overloaded. Okay, so we understand that. and now the config storage bucket is available. If I click on this button, it will, we can download and see this is how the storage bucket is currently looking. Acme URL, so this is what we have put, right? So this looks good to me. Now let us go ahead in the UiPath Studio and try to run this and try to basically use the storage bucket assets, right? So this is a sequence, this is a old created sequence. If I just go ahead and run this process, this is a pretty straightforward process, getting the asset, initializing the config, and downloading the data, right? So we have seen this in the previous part of the video. I will put the link in the description and you can refer that. In the scope of this video, we are going to create a new sequence. I'll call this storage buckets config, storage bucket config read. I will hit create. Okay, now let us see how we can read it, right? So the first activity which we have to do is we have to read the storage buckets, right? So if I go here and type storage buckets, right, so we have already stored the configuration file in the orchestrator in the storage bucket, so we have to read the storage, right? So read storage text. Let me go to the properties. What is the storage bucket name? Let me go back to the orchestrator, back. This is the name of the storage bucket, config bucket. We'll pass this guy here. Okay, the next thing we have to pass is the path. Where is the path? Now if I open the storage bucket, it says the full path, right? So this is the full path. I will just copy this. In case it is nested inside a folder, the full path will be available here. You can just copy it and paste it in the path. This expects in string variable, I have passed it, right? Now what is the orchestrator folder path? So if you will see, I am connected to the default folder, right? So this again can be verified here. I am in the default folder of the tenant. So for me, if I go here in the properties, the orchestrator folder will be default, right? So that is basically the folder which you are connected to, the tenant folder which you are connected to, right? So that's it. Now we have passed the storage bucket, we have passed the path, we are telling to read it from this folder. Now it will ask me where do you want to store the output, right? So if I hover over it, it says it's a string variable. So I hit Ctrl+K and I create a string variable called str_config, going by the variable naming convention. And in the variables, I have got a strconfig. Okay, now let us test this up to this workflow, that whether everything is okay or not. I will take a write line, and since this is a string variable, we can directly type it here. I'll save everything we have uploaded it here. Now if I run the file, what should happen? We should print the, it should print the storage bucket content in the write line. Okay, the process is executing. It has executed completely and we are able to see the data here. Okay, cool. So we are good till here. Let me get rid of this guy. And okay, now when we are working with a robotics enterprise configuration file, we already would have a code which is working in the form of data tables, right? So now what we want to do, we want to convert this structure to a data table so that we can accommodate the RE framework template, right? So what we have to do is we have to convert this thing to a data table. It's very easy. How can we do that? I can use an activity which is again provided by UiPath, a very awesome activity called generate data table, right? So if we'll go to the generate data table, we can put the sample, we can preview, and it will give us the output, right? So let us quickly configure this guy in the properties. Okay, let us continue on error. These are all the default properties. Input, so the for input as is string configuration file. Output, what is the data table variable you want? So I hit Ctrl+K and I create a variable called dt_config. Now my data is separated by tab. If you remember, I intentionally put tabs in between the data, right? That was because in the generate data table, I want the data to be separated by the tab. And in the first column of our data, if I just open the this guy storage bucket, so if you will see, the first is the description, right? Name, value, and the description. So we can always specify that one by clicking this checkbox. Use the first row as column headers, auto edit column type, separator by tab, hit OK, and we are done. Now what should happen is whenever I trigger the process, it should read the storage file and it should give me a data table, right, by the name dt underscore config. Okay, so now I have the data table with me, right? So if you'll go to the main, so in the previous video we were using the initallsettings.xaml, right? So this initallsettings used to expect the config path and all those settings, but now I don't have these two sheets. I only have a single configuration file in the form of a text. So if you would have noticed in the edit all setting, what was happening, right? It was just giving you a config object and it was just iterating each and every item of the data table and output it and output the values, right? So the same way we can also do that, right? So I will just copy this guy. Okay, let us just not copy, let us create it. Okay, so I take an assign activity and we want to have a dictionary of string and object. So I will create here a out underscore config variable, control K, out underscore config. Why we are creating this variable? Because we want this variable to store get each and every data in a form of a dictionary, so it is easy, right? If I go to the arguments, it is in the variable, so let me convert this to argument. Now it is an argument. Okay, and this would be of type out. The argument type will be a dictionary of string and object. And how we can initialize it, I can always go here and type new dictionary of string and object. So I am not going to write it, I will just copy and paste it here like this. I have initialized the dictionary. The syntax is pretty straightforward, new dictionary of string comma object, right? Now we have the data table with us. Now what I want to do is we want to assign each and every object from the data table to the config. So I have to take a for each loop. Why for each? Because we have to iterate the data, right? So the data is a data table, so that's why we have to use the for each of the data table. Drag and drop it here. For each row in the which is the data table, dt config. What we want to do is we want to assign each and every activity to this object, right? So how can we do that, right? So if we'll go to the edit all settings, it is already the logic is written here. We will just reuse this one. I'll just copy and paste it here. Why to rewrite the code, right? So if you'll understand it here, it says if the any of the row which we are getting in the configuration file is a white space or null in the name field, right? So let us try to understand the code. So the first, it will read each and every value for the name. So it says wherever the name is blank or a white space, you just ignore it, you do nothing. But if it is not null or white space, means you have some value in the name, what you do in the out object of the row, you just specify the row value. So what will happen is whenever it gets the acme url value, so this would be the key, and in the value it will specify this will be the key and this will be the value, right? So that is what it is written here. Whenever you find some name, you just assign the value to this object. So which is this object? This is nothing but the out config object, this one. Okay, so it's in out config and okay, we are good here. So let me just change it to out config to match like this. Okay, so now if our code is working correctly, and if I just attempt to print the URL, let's say, let us try that. Let me drag and drop a right line. Now if my entire code structure is correct and if I attempt to print this file name here, and I should be able to get the value, right? So let me try that one. So we will write out config and we have to specify the key, right? So what is the key we want? The key we want is the file name. Let me take the file name here, file name, and we have, if you remember, the this object is of type string, and object, the key is string, and the value it is going to return is an object. So what I will do is I will specify dot to string here. Now if I save it and let's try to run it, and we should get this path from the storage bucket. So I'll close this. Okay, and run the file. Fingers crossed. Let's wait for the execution to get completed. Okay, and if I go to the output, awesome, I was successfully able to get the path, right? So, and where this path I'm getting from? This path I am getting from the storage buckets which we have just uploaded. Now what is the benefit I am getting here? Now if I want to change anything, I can just update it to the storage bucket and this process will take it accordingly. Now the question arises, how can we use this one, right? So it is, you most of you might have guessed it correctly, but for the beginners, let me go ahead and create a new sequence. Okay, I'll call this sequence use storage buckets. Okay, I will hit create. Okay, I have already written this piece of automation. This is pretty straightforward automation. I will just copy this and paste it here. So in this automation, what we are doing is we are opening a browser. To open the browser, we require a config object, right? So let me just uh, use the storage bucket config read first here, right? So what I will do is I will go to the project and we have just used this one, right? Storage bucket config read. Drag and drop it here. It has only one out argument and that out argument is called config, fig config. Okay, and let me create a variable called config. Hit OK. Now what is happening? This is done. Okay, so I am invoking this workflow. So if you remember this workflow in output, it used to give me a dictionary. Now I have used one sequence, a plain sequence. This is just opening of the browser, typing in the username and the password, click on the button, getting the orchestrator asset, data scraping, and storing the data in a file, right? So now why we require assets in this process? Because if I just open the configuration file which we have uploaded in the storage buckets, to open the site it requires a acme URL. It will open this URL in the browser. Next, to log in to the acme site, it requires a credential. Now the credential is again this, so it requires a credential name. So this is the key, this is the value. And now once the data is scraped successfully, it want us to have a location where we want to save the file. So I have given a location where I want to save the file, and the file is called the acme data.xlsx. So as of now this is the same drive where we are and we don't have this data, right? So this is why we are using all these stuffs. So if you are not sure about this, you can refer the previous videos and you will get all of these details. So let me just open it quickly. So we are telling UiPath, you first go and go to this XAML in the storage buckets. In the storage bucket, you will find a storage bucket by the name which you have specified. Once you get the text file, you convert the text file to the data table and you return me a data table. That's it. We don't require this write line, by the way. I'll just save this and you return me this config object, right? So now in the storage buckets, wherever in the entire process I am using this process, if I just use a config object, so this was of type string and the object, so the object is now config. So in the open browser, I am telling UiPath to get me the value for the key acme URL, and when it hits the orchestrator, it will download, it will read the data, it will see that okay, acme URL is the acme URL which is specified there. It will go here, read this and save this. Now open the browser. Now it have to key in the credential. To key in the credential, again it will go to the config object, get this credential name and pass the value, right? So everything else is available in the workflow only. At the end, when the data scraping is completed, it will ask me where to write the data, right? So I want it to write the data in the config object where the file name is, where the key is the file name, right? So let me go ahead and run the file. So the expectation is when I run this process completely, I should get a file in the temp location here, right? So let us try to execute this storage buckets. Go here and run the file. Okay, so the bot will execute now. The bot has started the execution. Now if everything is okay, we should get the URL from the configuration file. Yes, we have got the URL. Now it has got the credential also. It will click on the login. Next it will click on the reports, download some of the reports, and now it should save this thing in a path. Seems like everything has worked perfectly in 24 seconds. Let me go to the folder, temp folder, and if I refresh, you will see the Acme data is created. That means we were successfully able to store the configuration file in the storage buckets. Right now, let me verify that it is working. Okay, so if I click on this download button, you see this were the credential, right? So now we can't change the Acme URL. We can go ahead and play with the credential thing, but let us change the file name. So we don't want the file name with the Acme data. Let us change this to something else. Okay, so if I go to the temp, there is one config, right? So let us now change it and upload it. So I want to store it with the Acme data of storage buckets. Okay, so now I have changed the name of the Excel. We can go ahead and change all the set of values, the credential and this one. So as of now, let us change this one, save this. Now the next, whenever I make the change, what I have to do is I have to update the file in the storage buckets, right? So let us wait for the orchestrator to go back. Okay, I am in my storage buckets, and let me go ahead and click on upload. So it says the existing file with the same name will be overwritten. Awesome, we want that feature. We want it to get it updated with the new name, and click on upload. Awesome, uploaded successfully. I can verify that by clicking on this button, and okay, Acme data storage bucket. Cool. Now if I run the process from the studio, it should get me the latest file in this folder, and if I'm able to get a new file with the new name, that means we were successfully able to store the credential in the storage bucket, sorry, store the configuration file in the storage bucket. So let me go ahead and run the file. Okay, so the bot has started its execution once again. It will again open the Acme site. Okay, it has opened to the Acme site. Now it will key in the credential, login, reports, download the appointment reports, scrape the data. It's done. Now let me go back to the temp folder, and if I refresh it, we already have a file called Acme data storage bucket with the same data, right? So if I just open this Excel, we should have the data whatever the visible on the screen. So that means we were successfully able to store the configuration file in the storage buckets and use it in your UiPath Studio with a minimal amount of code. Now let us see what is the benefit of storing the configuration file in the orchestrator as compared to the shared location. The first and the foremost, I don't have to worry about the file being opened by anyone. So I do not have to worry if the configuration file is opened by or closed by anyone. We don't have to care about the shared drive. The shared drive may be full, the shared drive access. We just have to worry about the storage buckets in the orchestrator. Now this default folder, we can have permissions in the orchestrator, and we can restrict this folder to the limited set of users. Whenever there is a change, we can always come to the storage bucket, upload the new configuration file here, and the UiPath process will take it accordingly, right? And in this demo, what we have done is we have accommodated the process such that with a limited amount of change, with the help of storage buckets, we don't have to revamp the entire code of robotics enterprise framework. We can just use the entire RE template with just one sequence, where we were able to successfully transform from the Excel config to a notepad or a text-based configuration file. That is all for this video. Let's have a quick recap. In this video, we have seen how can we store the configuration file in the storage buckets. After that, we have seen how we can use the text file from the storage bucket, convert it into a data table. Post that, we have seen how we can accommodate the same process or an existing process which is already developed or built in RE framework, and how can we use the storage bucket configuration file to work with the robotics enterprise template. And at the end, we have seen what are the benefits we get by storing the configuration file in the orchestrator. So that is all for this video. Thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments that what do you think? Is it really beneficial to store the configuration file in the orchestrator? And let me know if you have encountered any scenarios where you require a need to store the config in the orchestrator. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please do subscribe to the channel and happy automation.